Yeah, okay. Don't want me to talk, huh? Most of you know who I am. I'm Marvin's brother. My notes are a little shorter than Dennis's, but I want to make a couple of clarifications before I begin. Uh, Marvin's nickname, Willie, that came from Ben Miller. Ben Miller used to call Marvin Willie. So, very convenient. Once in a while he'd call me Willie too, but most of the time it was Marvin. Number two, in the late 70s, I was chief engineer at K-Wave in San Clemente before Calvary Chapel owned it. And they had kind of a frugal operation. They didn't make a lot of money, but they tried to. On the weekends, they did a lot of remote broadcast. Well, I couldn't do those alone. I couldn't carry them out. So Marvin and Dennis would come along week after week after week after week after week. And we'd set up and get it all ready and do our job. And Marvin told me one time, he said, I think that those times that he had with Dennis on all those remotes for a couple of years were a turning point in Dennis's life. We see that that's true. All right, I hope I can get through this. I'll try. I'm going to vow to. To say that Marvin and I are cut of the same cloth is probably an understatement. Not carbon copies for sure, 6 years apart, but we thought alike, same ideas, we were on the same page technically, personally, most any issue. And for the last 10 years, he and I spoke on the phone almost daily, just to touch base, and that was a good contact. We were very close. He was not only my brother, my best friend, and I don't know what else I can say. I think it's fair to you to understand a little bit how he was killed, because I'd like to know when I come to something like this, well, gee, how did he die? Well, he was on his way to Arizona. I had just talked to him a couple of hours before I let him go. We had a trip over from Arizona. He rode in my pickup truck back over to pick up his vehicle. I last saw him at 6:30. We had dinner at 6 o'clock at Tacos Al Carbone in Newport, or Tustin. He had a couple of cheesy enchiladas and rice and beans. Maybe that, I don't know. I don't think so. So about 8 o'clock, he took off and headed over to Arizona. And got up to the 215-60 interchange, heading east. And from what I can see, he just blacked out. Don't know why. He had no history of it, although he had a couple of bouts a while back with dehydration in Arizona and had some low blood pressure issues. But his blood pressure was always perfect or lower. So I don't think he had a stroke. I don't think he fell asleep. I know he didn't fall asleep because that's a pay attention moment. That stretch of road. He drives like I drive. Like I said, we're cut of the same cloth. I know how he handles fatigue on the road. Been there. He and I, over a lot of time, have logged maybe 2.5, 3 million miles. He was a very experienced driver. Witnesses said he just veered across the freeway and down the embankment and rolled over and caught on fire. No skid marks on the freeway. For Marvin, that wouldn't be unnormal because he didn't lock the wheels when he was braking down hard, so that's fine. But over the embankment, down the road, no sign of any hard braking or anything trying to stop or anything. Just tootled on down there and rolled over. That's it. So that's what we know. We still don't have the coroner's results. You know, could be a stroke or aneurysm, something like that. I'm thinking maybe he had a little bout with low blood pressure and just blacked out. Why? We don't know. So anyway, that gives you a little thumbnail sketch of what we know. I think it's fair to you to know as well. When I was 3 years old and my brother Marvin was about 9, younger brother 1 year. My mother passed away of a brain tumor. Prior to that, Marvin had been living with grandparents in Valley Center for a couple of years, so he didn't have too much recollection of his mother. I asked him about this maybe 3 months ago, because I said, look, I was 3 years old, I've only got 2 or 3 images of mother, and you spent several years with her. He said, well, not really, I was over in Valley Center. I said, I really don't remember her very much either. So that was interesting to me. He couldn't recall anything. But when he was back home, he had kind of a sense of responsibility to me. My dad left us at home by ourselves. It was okay in the 60s. Normal stuff, we went downtown, rode our bikes in, just so we were home by sundown, that was it. And so a neighbor had given us some, half a dozen, maybe a little bit more, what you would call Tonka toys. And so out back of our yard, we had a half acre of property there. My dad let us do everything. My dad was incredible, let me just tell you that. So we had an area that was probably, 15 feet by 20, and we'd make these mud roads with these tractors and everything else. And so we had a great time. He was probably 12, 13, maybe a little bit more. I was 7 or 8. And so one day we were a little bit hungry. So he said, well, all we've got here is we've got a couple of eggs. Let's just make some hard-boiled eggs. So we had us a little aluminum pot, put the eggs in the pot, brought it up to a boil, said, let's go out and do some roads here. We'll be back in 10 minutes and check on the eggs. Oh. Well, when you're that age, 10 minutes passes pretty fast. So we figured, well, about 10, 15 minutes has gone past. Let's go and see what's, let's eat. We went in, fire is running under the pot, no water in the pot, no eggs. Where are the eggs? Oh, we spent a half an hour scraping eggs off the ceiling. We didn't need them either. But that's the kind of stuff that he did. It was together. He had no problem including me in his life, even though he was the older brother. He never thought of himself as the older brother, just brother. When I was 7, he used to, 7 or 8, in his bedroom he had an old Hoffman TV, gutted the TV out of it. In those days, they tried to make TVs sound pretty good. It just didn't have a little speaker like that. Had a nice 10-inch speaker in the bottom of there, and he used that. Things sounded pretty good. He used to play the radio in there all the time. Well, that time, this song came on that I really liked on the radio by the Four Preps called 26 Miles. That was my favorite song. I love that song. And my dad, on my 7th Christmas, gave me a record player. And I had all the little 78s of how, the doggy in the window and all that stuff, which I liked pretty well. One day, this 45 showed up on my record player of 26 Miles. And I was ecstatic. My brother had bought that for me. Of course, I confronted him and said, oh, you bought that for me? Well, no, not really, just bought it. But, at that time, his allowance was, 25 cents a week or 50 cents, Cost him $1 for this record. So, he went out of his way for me. I've thought about that many times. And he used to ride me downtown on his bike double. We had on the bar that goes between the handlebars and the seat. He'd ride me on that and we'd go downtown. I don't know where my bike was at. Maybe I couldn't ride it. I don't know. And one day we were, just to give you a little humor, we had a neighbor that was a little different, and Marvin's bike had just half of a handlebar. The right hand one was broken off. He was still riding me double. And we were waiting in the middle of the street, our street, we didn't have much traffic. Marvin's rear tire on his bike had this big inch-long eyeball of a cord sticking out ready to pop. The neighbor was joining us, and we're just sitting there kind of just going as slow as we can, waiting for this guy to show up. All of a sudden, bam, he runs into the back of Marvin's bike right on the tire and blows his tire out, not Marvin's. And he gets off his bike and, okay, Marvin, that's strange. But anyway, he got out of that. We went on downtown riding double with a broken handlebar, got some Coke. All right. Marvin always seemed to know about electronics from as far back as I can ever remember. I don't know how he did it, but he always seemed to know about it. And he was self-taught. I was self-taught. Never went to school to lick for electronics or anything else. He's very well respected in what he did because he knew. Because he liked to think, and he knew how to think. That's the difference between a lot of people. He knew how to think. 1957, my dad started a television repair business in the back of our house. Part-time, he just in the evenings he'd go out and make service calls. So Marvin and I would go out on service calls. And that kind of, shall we say, shoved Marvin a little bit further into the electronics world. Marvin always loved TV cameras, and he started out helping out. There was a teacher in Carlsbad, an art drawing teacher named Bruce McIntyre. Bruce McIntyre's love was for closed-circuit TV and for video recording to share his art lessons in a broader way than just one classroom at a time. So Marvin helped him out with the cameras there, and the Carlsbad schools had a closed-circuit system at a couple of places, and Marvin took care of it. So that was his introduction to cameras. And of course, he went on to Trinity. He spent 20 years at Trinity. He was Mr. Cameraman. He took care of the cameras at Trinity from 1979 to 2000. Ended up working with the last of the big RCA TK-47 studio cameras. So he enjoyed that. When he was younger, probably 16, he kind of took an interest in cars. My dad gave him his 1950 Ford 6-cylinder car, which he had just put a rebuilt engine in maybe 6 months earlier. Marvin didn't want that 6-cylinder engine in there, and he built some gallows in the backyard, which my dad let us do all this stuff. And then he had a friend that had what's called a chain fall, and so he'd back there pulling the engine out, and he put in this little V8 239 engine, and souped it up, and my dad was a little dismayed, but my dad allowed it. My dad was a good man. So over the course of time, over about 4 years, Marvin rebuilt engines, did a lot of body work, did all sorts of things, and became very proficient in auto mechanics. He knew engines, he knew cars, so that paid off very well in the future for him to be able to take care of stuff by himself. He knew how to think, that's what I'm trying to tell you. So he did have a little quirks about him, as you know. He had difficulty with absurdness. While he was working on a car one day, he had a friend who he was trading some headers with on a 62 Ford. Marvin had a 62 Ford also. So for some reason, the neighbor woman became disenchanted with Marvin. We were friends for a long time, and then I don't know what happened. I don't think Marvin knows what happened, but all of a sudden Marvin was the bad guy. Really bad guy. She was trying to figure out any way to get us out of the neighborhood, whatever she could do. It's fine. So one day, Marvin's out there working on his car, taking some stuff off to trade, and a woman comes out and says, "Where'd you get that car?" Marvin says, "I stole it." She goes running back in and calls cops. Next thing you know, the cops show up. Of course, Marvin knew all the cops. So they can say, well, whose car is this, Marvin? She says, you know whose it is. It's Wayne Kitzmiller's. I'm trading the headers here, blah, blah, blah. Well, this woman says you stole it. Come on, man, you know. I'm not going to do that. You know me. All right, well, listen, just try to go easy on her over there. She's just kind of a little troublemaker. So that's the way he kind of handled absurdness. Well, he was pretty busy with cars, and he didn't have much time for love life at all. There were a couple of girls, I think, that were pretty drop-dead gorgeous that he just didn't have the courage to ask out, or he knew what kind of baggage they might have. I don't know. There were occasions where he tried to be in the right place at the right time. I never remembered him going on a date. And we were pretty close there growing up. It was the same house, and we were bosom buddies. So one day, he comes home. He says, I met somebody. Oh, what are you, is it your girlfriend? Well, I don't know. I said, well, are you going to take her out? Yeah. I said, well, what's her name? Donna. Well, the rest is history. 5 kids, 8, 9 grandchildren? It just keeps going. He was happily married, basically, as we all have our ups and downs, but marriage is marriage, and 57 years kind of attests to that. Actually, he's 1 month shy of 57 years. I'll close with this one thought here. When my mother was alive, she was the organist. She played cello at the Carlsbad Community Church. She had a good friend named Dorothy Kelly that played the piano there. And that church was like a lot of community churches. They had people who thought they were better than other folks. Let's just put it that way. So my dad, he loved plays on words too. And he's working at Camp Pendleton. He was in the water department, working with pumps and wells and sewage and everything else. So this one woman, my dad wanted to have a bus for the church. He thought it would be a good idea for the church to have a bus for bring Sunday school kids. So the church down the street, the little one down there, the Assembly of God Church, they've got a bus. Why don't we get a bus? And this one woman, she was affluent, they're part of one of the board members' wives. Well, Mr. Vosper, we don't need any more people here. We have enough already. Oh. And my dad, being a play on words, coming from the water department and sewer, he said, well, I know, ma'am, that you are more affluent than I am. Of course, she took it with an A, but he meant it with an E. Well, Marvin got a little bit of that, so did I. So, long story short about that, we didn't go to church because my dad had a lot of bad experiences with that church. After my mother passed away in 1954, he just stayed home. So did we. Well, about 1960, we had some neighbors in there for a little while. They were going to the Assembly of God Church that had the little bus. And they kept trying to get Marvin to go to church. And finally, he went. And when he went, he gave his heart to Jesus. That starts a lifelong love affair with God. You don't turn back on that. It's the term what born again means. You are. Becomes part of you. You become in love. And God is in love with you. You want to remember that. The most important question of life, I feel, is this. After we go through everything, We have all the nonsense, all the garbage, even the good stuff, all the problems, heartaches that we have. Do you still choose and select freely on your own free will Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? The answer should be yes. So what would Marvin say to you today about this, about his faith? He'd only say one thing. The most important decision you can make in your entire life is whether or not you know Jesus Christ as Savior. End of story.